So remember earlier this year when I released that retrospective video, I mentioned this announcement at the end. We got the news that a new Toopy and Binoo series is in the works, like a reboot from what I would say, and it is going to be released in the spring of 2026. Well, let's just say this thing came by much more earlier than what it was expected to be. What's up, everybody? This is Willie, and today I'm back talking about Toopy and Binoo, which I wouldn't have expected to come this early to talk about the reboot that had just dropped recently. So what I did once it came out is I watched obviously the first batch of episodes that were released, and periodically they're going to be releasing more, kind of similar to the modern tropes of what shows usually do. So by that means, I'm not going to be doing like my traditional review where I recap every episode, because I need to have every episode of the respective season in order to do it. So this is going to be a different style of video that is more subverted from how I typically review these animated media. So in other words, I would describe this video to be a lot more objective based, where I'm just generally sharing my early thoughts about the Toopy and Binoo reboot, which is now titled as Toopy and Binoo Fabulous Adventures. But furthermore, what I like to do is break down some key takeaways that I garnered from what this reboot offered, which in other words, I'm going to be sharing my thoughts on the plot so far, the new characters that are going to have a significant role, as well as talk generally about how well it acts as a semi-legacy sequel, and also compare its shtick to its predecessor. So starting off with my general opinions on how I think the story plots went, they have been surprisingly good so far. Like after watching the batch of episodes, I'm just generally enjoying reliving the experience of watching characters Toopy and Binoo on my screen again, as they have been such a signifier to my childhood. Despite me obviously aged up to where I shouldn't even be watching their show, I still think no, for nostalgic purposes and validation, I generally cannot disregard seeing what the reboot was gonna do with my beloved characters. These episodes have some interesting shtick and style. I enjoy some of the plots, which some of them has resonated with me. And also like at points we had some like singing sequences, like giving me off that Backyardigans vibe that I just love in an episode. Like this show is getting that vibe. And it's like a reboot that I think is done right for the most part, which is surprising. Like generally, modernized reboots of shows in my childhood have not really gone well. I mean, we just even saw that with the Backyardigans last year, and that was just a colossal disaster. Like despite how much of an excitement I had felt with the announcement of this reboot, I also came in with a lot of iffiness considering the worry of the show trying to retread some modern tropes of animated media that just doesn't work well for me. But this show really sees any of my anticipation of those worries and delivers some really competent storylines. Like I'm really loving this reboot, where outside of the total drama, I feel like any other show's reboot has just not panned out well. So it does feel really appealing that this show was able to stimulate its solid quality, and on top of that, introducing this show to a more modern audience that I hope will give them a fresh perspective on this gem, adding in a bit of modern tropes that also won't alienate longtime fans like myself and others who continue to support the show's production and otherwise future material that it's offering moving forward. And I'm so glad that we are getting this as soon as we can before we are hit with that Cocomelon virus. So then next up, we have to talk about the characters, where we're obviously familiar with Toopy and Binoo, so no need for me to make a eulogy on them. However, there are three somewhat new characters who do play a central role in some of the episodes. And yes, they are characters who do provide dialogue too, just like Toopy, which is a fascinating dynamic that was once started back in the first mini-movie. And I thought it was an interesting sort of trope that created a new dynamic where Toopy isn't the central, let's just say, narrator of these particular episodes. So this reboot is continuing that vein with these characters. So to give a lot more of an interesting emphasis, I'll go ahead and give each of the characters a little brief eulogy. So we can start that off with Coco, who I'm not particularly 100% what her species is going to be, so don't mind if you share in the comments what she actually is. But from what I can tell, she's either like a squirrel or a chipmunk. But basically, I think she's a pretty fascinating character. You know, she acts as the mail woman who delivers packages and envelopes to Toopy's home. And I think she brings a different sort of archetype with the show, where her physical disability is such a unique sort of representation that she inherits, alongside also representing her Quebecois background, which factors into her impeccable accent. And I usually have a fond for those kind of dynamics to a character, and I obviously have a lot of respect for her with how her character embodies these and represents herself in a way to make the inclusion feel as relevant. And as her character on her own right, she's been alright so far. You know, not really like having a big moment or anything that really makes her pop, but based on where we are at, her traits show promise for her to stand out more in the future outside the characters of Toopy and Binoo. So then our next character is Ed the Elephant, who's certainly the first of the two that is a direct counterpart to the Legacy series, where his design matches with an elephant that occasionally appeared throughout the series and even in the mini spin-off, so it does bring an interesting mold with his character. We're to talk about his traits individually, he's just fine. I mean, so far we haven't really gotten much out of him, just a short appearance in the pasta episode and then some cameos where he sometimes acts as a background character. With more coming down the road, there's definitely anticipation that he will eventually have a centric episode where he plays a much more integral role that will make his character pop, but as of right now, where we're at, he's just on the spectrum where he's just fine. Alright, then lastly, we have Emmy the Green Dragon, whom is the other character that acts as the counterpart to the female dragon in the Legacy series, though with a few different details aesthetically, but for her role in this series so far, I've been liking her. You know, she didn't really have that much focus when she appeared in the first half of episodes we got, but then once we got to that magic show episode, this is where we got a lot more to glean on with her character, and she's pretty decent. Although there wasn't much really compelling with her, I did like how insistent she was with her dynamic with Toopy in that episode. With how much screw-ups Toopy kept causing, she really had such great patience with him and continued to give him such an immense amount of support, which reduced any sort of discouragement to be had when he tried to do his trick. So I think that aspect really highlights her personality as well, having such an immense laid-back persona as well as embracing a very cordial mold in her that makes her equally as likable as the other characters I just mentioned, with that little gusto in her as well. So that really wraps up my brief thoughts on the new characters and how I think about their roles so far. So then to where we are at, I think it's been a decent ride so far. Like, as a Legacy sequel, it's definitely well self-aware, especially giving some continuity to some storylines from the Legacy series, which was surreal to see 20 years later. But also, as modern it can be, it also involves a lot of the pop culture with like the digital use / technology, where in one case we had Toopy using a literal tablet to purchase a delivery order, which I think this aspect generates a different sort of aesthetic for the show, and also how it basically acts as an influence to these particular kind of pop culture. And also furthermore, let's talk about another case like this, where at a point Toopy owned a device called Deary, which hey, rhymes with Siri, and finally I thought that was the name of it until I had to check over to find out that the name is actually Deary. But basically this device resembles those Amazon Alexa Bluetooth assistants, where this device functions exactly like them. So overall, it is an interesting touch where this show inherits a lot of the pop culture to basically signify its impact in the present days, and it'll be something to anticipate moving forward as we get more episodes dropping in, to see how influential this show is with technology. And then I guess for the final part, where I do a bit of a critical comparison with this reboot to its Legacy counterpart, where let's start out with the obvious animation style, which is somewhat a direct persistence of the movie style, mostly for Binoo's end, with a bit of some detailed tweaks to him to match with the quality of the style in the reboot. And then to talk about Toopy, where he's pretty much a direct carbon copy to the Legacy with just a bit of tweaks to the animation aesthetic, which I mean, the animation style as a whole is alright, definitely not to the egregious level like the Backyardigans did, which those are just atrocious. So there is some props to give to his reboot to trying to maintain its quality, and though I think the Legacy still holds a lot more weight to it, I'm liking what the reboot is doing to progress that charm in the modern production of this series. Also for the humor, there's some solid slapstick, and at least the continuation of the zaniness that I enjoyed. Like, I want to give props to Toopy's voice actor, Frank Mushkalet, who returned to reprise the role of Toopy, and it's really refreshing to see him continue the charm of Toopy's character, and exuding some fun, zany, and dodo-ish moments from Toopy in this reboot. Although I can critique, not really on his end, but more so how Toopy is portrayed a bit too hammy at points, I still do enjoy the beauty of what has been relived from 20 years ago. Plus, earlier I did mention about songs being in the mix in some episodes, which I do think is a riveting sprinkle. Like, overall, this reboot has really lived up to the expectations, and so far been a competent run as of this recording. Hopefully that sticks, which I feel confident it will. And it's just really a refreshing sort of feeling, especially having rewatched the series in honor of its 20th anniversary earlier this year. And although we did have some following media like the movie, which I still never watched, and it's not like it's never gonna happen, I just never had the time to do it. As well as we had Toopy and Binoo Vroom Vroom Zoom, which over time, after my retrospective, I started to feel really removed from that series. Not that it's bad or anything, I just think it hasn't really stuck well for me and came off extremely unnotable. Where through that, I've just begun to feel a lot more isolated from it, especially after my retrospective of the Legacy series, where it's pretty much overshadowed a lot of the quality of that spin-off. Not that I'm not gonna one day make a review on it, because I still plan on doing so. I just feel at the point where I'm at now, I've just been completely checked out of it. And one more thing to talk about is the intro sequence, which I liked what they did here, where they pretty much reused the rhythm of the legacy version and displayed them over a new visual that we got, which I think was aesthetically interesting, but also gave us a lot more insight on the adventures Toopy and Binoo would go on, which is something that I do like when it comes to opening sequences, as it evokes more depth, which gives us better perspectives on what to expect. Where comparing to the legacy intro, it's not bad either. It does partially evoke what's to come, mostly for character-wise, but it just feels a bit too broad. It just makes it a bit more standardized, while this one feels like a lot more qualitative. That offers more perspectives that makes me more interested. That's everything I have to say about my early thoughts on the latest Toopy and Binoo reboot with the episodes that had been released. Likewise, whenever the season is complete, I will then make my traditional review on it where I recap every episode and share my thoughts on them along the way. So hit that subscribe and like this video because I'll be continuing to cover animated media down the road with this channel. So with all of that, I appreciate you all tuning in.